You're happy for them. You really are. Your partner got the promotion, finished the project, received the praise. And yet, somewhere underneath the smile, there's this small, uncomfortable feeling you don't want to name. It's not anger. It's not resentment. It's something quieter. Something you wish wasn't there. That feeling is envy. And if you've felt it towards someone you love, you're not broken. You're human. Psychologists have studied this for decades, and what they found is that envy doesn't show up because you're a bad person. It shows up because your brain is trying to protect something it thinks is at risk. Most people think envy only appears between strangers or rivals. But research in relationship psychology shows it's actually more common between people who are close. Partners, friends, siblings, people who share the same life, the same space, the same standards for what success looks like. And that proximity is exactly what makes envy so painful. Here's what happens in your brain. When someone close to you achieves something, your mind automatically compares. Social comparison theory suggests that we measure our own worth by looking at the people around us, especially those in similar positions. When your partner succeeds in an area where you're struggling, or in an area you value deeply, your brain interprets it as a threat to your own standing. Not consciously, but the feeling is there. The uncomfortable part is that envy often appears in the relationships where you care the most. You might not feel envious of a celebrity's success because their life feels distant, unrelated to yours. But when your partner gets recognition for something you've been working toward, or when they seem to move forward while you feel stuck, the comparison feels immediate, personal. And that triggers what psychologists call upward social comparison, where you measure yourself against someone who appears to be doing better. But here's where most people misunderstand envy. It's not the same as jealousy. Jealousy is about fear of loss. You're worried someone will take what's yours. Envy is about perceived inadequacy. It's your brain saying, they have something I want, and I don't measure up. In relationships, that distinction matters, because envy isn't about losing your partner. It's about losing your sense of competence, value, or progress in comparison to them. Research in attachment theory shows that people with anxious attachment styles tend to experience more envy in relationships, not because they're insecure about their partner's love, but because they're more sensitive to feelings of inadequacy. When their partner succeeds, their brain doesn't just register pride, it also registers a quiet question. Am I enough? And that question, left unexamined, can turn into resentment over time. Some people try to hide envy by overcompensating. They celebrate too loudly, offer too much praise, or immediately shift the conversation away from their partner's success. Psychologists call this emotional suppression, and studies suggest it often backfires. Suppressing envy doesn't make it go away, it just makes it show up in other ways. Passive comments, subtle criticism, or emotional distance. But here's the part people rarely talk about. Envy isn't always destructive. In some cases, researchers have observed what they call benign envy, a form of envy that motivates you to improve without tearing the other person down. It's the feeling that says, I want that too, and then channels that desire into action. The difference between benign and malicious envy comes down to what you do with the feeling. Do you use it to grow, or do you use it to diminish? The challenge in relationships is that envy often exists alongside love. You can genuinely want your partner to succeed while also feeling the sting of comparison. And that duality makes people feel guilty. They think, I should only feel proud. What's wrong with me? But psychology suggests that having conflicting emotions doesn't make you flawed. It makes you complex. The issue isn't the feeling itself, it's whether you let it control how you treat your partner. There's also a deeper layer here. Some envy in relationships isn't about what your partner achieved, it's about what their success represents. If your partner gets recognition in their career, and you've been struggling in yours, the envy might not be about their job at all. It might be about your own fear of not measuring up, of being left behind, of not mattering in the way you want to matter. Psychologists refer to this as identity threat, where someone else's success feels like a challenge to how you see yourself. This is why envy tends to appear more in relationships where both people are pursuing similar goals. Two people in creative fields, two people building careers, two people working on personal growth. The closer your paths, the more opportunities for comparison. And comparison, according to research, is one of the fastest ways to erode personal satisfaction. You stop focusing on your own progress and start measuring it against theirs. But envy doesn't just affect the person feeling it, it affects the relationship itself. When one partner feels envious, they often pull back emotionally. They stop sharing their struggles because they don't want to appear weak. They stop celebrating the other person's wins because it's too painful. And over time, that creates distance. Studies on relationship satisfaction show that unexpressed negative emotions, including envy, are linked to decreased intimacy and increased conflict. What makes this harder is that most people don't talk about it. Envy feels shameful. It feels like an admission that you're not happy for someone you love. So instead of naming it, people bury it. They rationalize it. They tell themselves it's not envy, it's just stress or frustration or timing. And maybe some of that is true. But avoidance doesn't resolve the feeling. It just delays the conversation that needs to happen. Here's what research in couples therapy suggests. When envy shows up, the healthiest response isn't to suppress it or to act on it impulsively. It's to recognize it as information. What is this feeling telling you about yourself? What do you want that you're not pursuing? What fear is underneath the comparison? Envy, when examined, often reveals unmet needs, unexplored goals, or unspoken insecurities. Some people experience envy because they've tied their self-worth to external achievement. If your sense of value depends on being the most successful, the most recognized, the most accomplished, then anyone who surpasses you, even your partner, becomes a threat. This is what psychologists call contingent self-esteem, where your confidence rises and falls based on how you compare to others. And in relationships, that creates a fragile dynamic. Your partner's success feels like your failure. But there's another side to this. Sometimes envy appears not because you lack confidence, but because you've lost momentum. You used to feel excited about your goals. You used to feel like you were moving forward. And then something shifted. Your partner kept progressing, and you didn't. And now their growth feels like a mirror reflecting your stagnation. That's not envy rooted in insecurity. That's envy rooted in disconnection from your own path. Research on motivation suggests that comparison becomes toxic when it's passive. When you watch someone else succeed without taking action yourself, the gap between where you are and where they are only grows. But when comparison becomes a catalyst, when you see someone's success and it reminds you what you want, it can serve as a wake-up call, not to compete with them, but to reconnect with yourself. There's also the question of how envy gets communicated. Some people express it indirectly through sarcasm, minimizing comments, or by shifting attention back to themselves. Psychologists call this conversational narcissism, where someone derails another person's moment because they can't tolerate not being the focus. It's not always intentional, but it damages trust, because the person sharing their success starts to feel like they can't be celebrated without consequence. The tricky part is that envy in relationships often coexists with genuine love and pride. You can feel both. And that's okay. The problem arises when you deny the envy, pretend it's not there, and let it quietly erode the connection. Research in emotional regulation shows that acknowledging difficult emotions, even uncomfortable ones, tends to reduce their intensity over time. Ignoring them tends to amplify them. Some relationships develop what therapists call competitive dynamics, where partners unconsciously turn their lives into a scoreboard. Who's more successful? Who's more productive? Who's more admired? And when that happens, the relationship stops being a partnership and starts being a comparison. Every achievement becomes a point. Every struggle becomes a deficit, and intimacy gets replaced by scorekeeping. But not all envy looks the same. For some people, it's sharp and immediate. For others, it's subtle and accumulates over time. You might not feel envious in the moment your partner shares good news, but later, when you're alone, the feeling creeps in. And that delayed reaction can be confusing. You think, I was happy for them earlier. Why do I feel this way now? Psychology suggests that delayed emotional responses often occur when you're processing multiple feelings at once: pride, joy, and the quieter, harder to admit sense of inadequacy. There's also a cultural layer here. Many people grow up with the belief that you should always be happy for the people you love. No exceptions. No complicated feelings. And while that's a nice ideal, it's not how emotions work. Research in emotional complexity shows that healthy relationships allow space for mixed feelings. You can be proud and envious, supportive and struggling, loving and insecure, all at once. The issue isn't having those feelings. It's whether you create space to process them without shame. If you're the partner experiencing envy, the first step isn't to eliminate it. It's to get curious about it. What does this feeling reveal about what you want? What does it say about where you feel stuck? What would it look like to pursue your own goals without needing to match or surpass your partner? Sometimes envy is a signal that you've drifted from your own sense of purpose, and instead of resenting your partner's clarity, you can use that feeling as a reminder to reclaim your own. If you're the partner who's succeeding, and you sense envy from the person you love, the response isn't to dim your light or apologize for your progress. It's to remain curious and compassionate, not to take on their envy as your problem, but to stay open to the fact that your success might be triggering something in them that has nothing to do with you. And sometimes that just needs to be acknowledged, not fixed, just seen. Psychologists working with couples often suggest that envy becomes manageable when both people can talk about it without judgment, not in a confrontational way, but in a way that says, "I'm feeling something uncomfortable and I want to understand it." That kind of honesty doesn't weaken a relationship. In many cases, it deepens it, because it shows that you trust the other person enough to be vulnerable, even when the vulnerability isn't flattering. Some people worry that admitting envy will hurt their partner, and in some cases that's true. But research on relationship resilience suggests that unexpressed resentment is far more damaging than expressed vulnerability. When envy stays hidden, it leaks out in other ways, through irritability, through withdrawal, through passive criticism, and those behaviors create confusion and distance. Naming the feeling, even if it's hard, often clears the air. There's also the question of what happens when envy becomes chronic, when it's not just a passing feeling, but a persistent pattern. That's when it's worth looking deeper. Sometimes chronic envy points to a mismatch in the relationship, not a lack of love, but a lack of alignment. If one person is constantly achieving while the other feels perpetually behind, the dynamic might need to shift. Maybe the relationship needs more balance. Maybe the person feeling envy needs support in pursuing their own goals. Maybe both people need to redefine what success means for them, together. But here's the thing most people miss. Envy doesn't mean the relationship is broken. It means there's a feeling that hasn't been processed, a need that hasn't been named, a conversation that hasn't happened yet. And in many cases, working through envy actually strengthens the relationship because it forces both people to look at their own insecurities, their own goals, and their own sense of self. And that kind of self-awareness, according to research, is one of the strongest predictors of long-term relationship satisfaction. If this resonates, try this. Next time you notice envy toward your partner, pause. Don't act on it. Don't suppress it. Just notice it. Ask yourself, what do I actually want? What am I afraid of? What would I need to feel secure in my own progress? And then, if it feels right, share that with your partner. Not as an accusation, just as an observation. I noticed I felt uncomfortable when you shared that, and I think it's because I'm struggling with something in my own life. That kind of honesty doesn't guarantee an easy conversation, but it opens the door to a real one.